Great, thanks everyone. Good morning, and I'm super energized and enthusiastic to be here. It's a privilege to follow Hillary Carter, who's an extraordinary leader. I love the not yet. I love when we do talks and then we try to think about what are you going to remember in a day or what are you going to remember in a few years. I'm grabbing the not yet, and I love the 7-year-old story because I think, but it really speaks to what is now exciting and possible in medical countermeasures development, and we need to remind ourselves every day of that not yet point. So hopefully we can capture that. I want to do 3 things in my talk today. I want to thank you. I want to inspire you and hopefully challenge you. I want our challenge to be a bit bidirectional because we really need you to do more, but also you need us to do more as well. And I plan to go into that a little bit of detail, but I do want to start with a little bit of framing that it's an incredible privilege to work at the White House because you kind of get to see all of the great work, not only that our government does, but that our nation is doing. And whether it's working on a biodefense sensor or a local public health officer or all the different things that we did during the pandemic, you get this unique time in your life where you get a bit of a bird's eye view. And in that bird's eye view, I can deliver essentially one message, which is what you're doing here, this ecosystem, this 1,500 participants, the time you're spending right now is absolutely essential for our mission to keep our nation safer, to make sure pandemics never happen again, and to make sure we are a few steps ahead of future threats. And I grew up in this system. You're my people. I was 23 years active duty Army, infectious diseases. And so I've been there and I've felt does what I do really matter? Does anybody care about it? Or my project's failing or anything else? And all I can tell you is I've been there. I'm at the White House now. What you're doing is it's essential. It is absolutely essential if we are going to achieve the goals that you just heard about. The National Biodefense Strategy does not work without this 1,500 participants, without our biodefense ecosystem being 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times better than we already even have been before. And so with that perspective in mind, I want to make a few points, give some highlights and talk, and then we're going to have hopefully a very robust question and answer session. We're going to bring Hillary back up as my crutch because I don't want to field all the questions myself. She'll be much better at the answers than I will. But again, starting with a thank you and the gratitude that I feel, but I hope that we all collectively feel for the work that's been done. I do, in just about every time I speak publicly about pandemic preparedness and biodefense, I think we need to be mindful of what continues to happen in terms of our COVID pandemic and flu and RSV and what we're still going through now. And it's been now, interesting, another landmark of 1,000 days since the pandemic started. And we all know the lives lost. We all know about long COVID. We all have personal experience of tragedy and isolation with this pandemic. And we should be constantly reflective and mindful of that. We shouldn't say pandemic's in the rearview mirror and we don't need to worry about it anymore. I know this audience is like, I know you're not doing that. Surprisingly, a lot of people are. But we should reflect on the tragedy, but we should also hopefully take hope from some of the good work that was done in the response to this pandemic. And so my thank you is collectively to everyone because all of you contributed in your way for our United States and global pandemic response and made an extraordinary difference. I think I don't want to, actually what I'm going to do is I am going to make a mistake. So public speaking 101, either thank a few people individually or don't thank anyone individually. So, and then I'm going to make the mistake. So I'm going to single out 3 groups super quick because I think it illustrates the point. my point of gratitude. The first is a thank you for those that do government service, that perform the selfless service, active duty, government civilians that are part of our US government team. I want to thank you for what you've done. Some of that has been, some people in this room have extraordinarily uniquely contributed to our US and global pandemic response. We have dozens and dozens of examples of this community being heroes in that regard. But also, there were a lot of people in our government that just kept the trains running on time, that focused on all the other functions that we needed to, and they did it. And so I thank you deeply for that selfless service. Second group I want to thank is a bit more specific now, and it's, we had a chance to visit Lawrence Livermore National Labs on Monday, and I visited Lawrence Berkeley National Labs yesterday, and I've had a long history of working with the National Labs. Those National Labs people that are here, you are, every time I interact with National Lab personnel, I am astounded by your scientific expertise, and maybe slightly more importantly, your mission focus on keeping our nation safe. And you're a national treasure. You exemplify, again, this selfless service. There is a long track record of what you've done for pandemic response, and we're going to need you to do more. But I really want to thank you in particular for what you've done. The third thank you goes out to our international colleagues who join us in this meeting and in everything we do in chem biodefense. And I had the privilege early when I was an Army major of serving at DSTO Port and Down for 2.5 years as an exchange officer. So I got a chance to live it, and I loved it, and my family loved it, some of the best 2 years we've had. But I make that point because you're the other group that will get particularly thanked right now, because we cannot do this alone. A global pandemic, the global threat requires a global response. Total cliche. Why do we say it over and over again all the time? It's because we have to live it. We have to work extra hard to make sure we're working with our allies and partners. We need our allies and partners to come and join us in conferences like this. So you being here, my experience at DSTL Port and Down, more than a couple years ago. All of that has helped us respond to this pandemic, and it's absolutely essential for future response. So we always need to be mindful as we talk through this. And my comments are going to sound a lot of US focused, because I'm working on the American Pandemic Preparedness Plan. But our international friends that are here right now, and then our larger community in Chem Biodefense S&T, we're so grateful for that partnership. And we should continually pledge to make sure that we are good partners. I'm going to talk about partnership a little bit later, and there's an international component to that as well. So thank you. I also promised to try to inspire and challenge you a little bit. And the way I thought about this, we're going to get to question and answer soon. I always try to figure out what the audience wants to hear from, and oftentimes question and answer is the best way to do that. But in this case, I was like, okay, I'll just pretend we're taking the first question. So I'm pretending now, I'm reading the teleprompter, and it says, essentially, great, we heard from Hillary Carter, she's awesome, glad we have a national biodefense strategy, but be more specific, and what's new? What's new or different? And then there's a sub-question under there, and it says, what have you learned from the COVID experience? Very broadly, how we do work, how we do contracting, and specifically in terms of how we respond to a devastating infectious disease. What have you learned from the COVID response, and even more importantly, what are you doing about it? And then the final question is kind of, what are you doing for me? And what I mean you, what are we as a United States government doing for you to make you successful? I just spent probably way too much time on this big thank you thing, right? And what you should say is, okay, you're welcome, but I really need you to help me be successful. And so what we hope we are starting with a government philosophy, and we're really preaching this at the White House level in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and certainly with our NSC colleagues, is that the innovation comes from you, whether you're in a government lab or national lab or academia or private sector, small biotech, large pharma, all the collective group that's here today. You're the ones doing the work. You're the ones doing the innovation. So what are we doing to make you successful? Our buzzword is we are enabling the innovation, the breakthrough innovation that's going to solve our problems and achieve this great mission. So what are we doing? So the rest of my talk is hopefully going to answer that, question number one. And it's a hard one to answer, but I'll take a shot at it. And then we can, hopefully Hillary can come save me in the further question and answer too. I'll give sort of a four-part answer to that question. The first is we're setting an overarching strategy and we have a plan. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I have 3 Ps on what we're doing. Portfolio approach, partnership, and pivoting. 3 Ps, not because I'm clever, just I figured I'd probably forget it otherwise. So portfolio, partnerships, and pivoting. And I'll give you a couple specific examples of what I mean by that. Because I do think we are doing better by rethinking how we work with you in those 3 areas. And very interested in your feedback to see if that is, and hopefully by the end of the talk I convince you as such. So to start with strategy, it's great that I followed Hillary, and you heard about the National Biodefense Strategy in great detail. I want to emphasize that this is an extraordinary accomplishment, that Hillary Carter, her leadership, Beth Cameron's leadership, Raj Punjabi's leadership, and a US government process, really that's been ongoing for years, led to the culmination of that document. That document is important for a couple reasons, but number one, the president signed it. And I've said this at the Livermore meeting, and I'll say it here too. The president signed it. So if there is a question of what is the administration priorities, it's that. It's very clearly stated. Does the United States government care about this? It does, and now that's publicly available. And so what we ask this community to do is to please read the document. Okay, it's publicly, it's posted, it's available, and that's your if you will, your homework assignment. And I'm very bi-directional, so you can give me a lot of follow-up and work to do too. But my homework for you is you got to go back and you got to read it again. And you have to read it again and you have to read it again. And the reason for it is that when you read that, you should say, I'm working on this. And you should know exactly how that fits into the overarching strategy. And if you read it and it says, I'm doing this, and I can't find a place for it in the National Biodefense Strategy, well, then I'm going to ask you, well, then what are you doing? You know? But if you read it and you say, God, they need me to come through on this, because then we're going to be able to achieve this part of it, and it's clear where they need me, then not only do you have to succeed, but we as a government have to help you. And we need to make sure all of our programmatic support and milestones and tests and evaluation and all that stuff that we do in partnership with you is to help you achieve that goal. And if you're on the government side of things, we need to do this same exercise. Is your portfolio aligned with the national strategy? If not, why not? And if your leadership says, well, and I'm obviously being super hyperbolic, but if your leadership says, National Biodefense Strategy, yeah, got it, but I'd rather do this, then we really have a problem, okay? And then in this community, not much of a problem. But the point is, we need you to read the strategy, we need you to succeed, and in particular, where we need you to succeed is the bold outcomes. Now, for hopefully those of you that were listening closely, Hillary was talking about some incredibly audacious goals across the spectrum of biodefense. And if you listen carefully, and then when you go back and do your homework and you read this, you should have the initial response, like, this is impossible. Like, it is impossible in our current construct. We are not going to be able to go from sequence to as much life-saving treatment and vaccines and diagnostics and everything we need in 100 days right now. It's impossible. And a lot of the other goals are even more ambitious than that. So, but in that, the beauty of a goal being a far-reaching goal is it motivates us to achieve that. So what I hope you do as you read is you say, great, this is how we're going to achieve that 100-day goal. We're going to be able to make a vaccine in 100 days. Here's how we're going to do it. And my research is going to contribute to these 3 parts. So I think what this group, the National Security Council, has really done is it's given us the mission. It's given us some great audacious goals. It's also, a lot of people have said, well, we don't really know what the plan is for biodefense, or what are we doing about pandemics in the future and things like that. We have publicly available documents, so we have a plan. And now it's incumbent on us to execute that plan. Complementing that strategy is the American Pandemic Preparedness Plan, which is what I work on at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We recently did our first, it came out last September, so we did a one-year annual progress report. Both are publicly available. Also homework assignments, if you don't mind, please read. What I will compel you to take a look, because in that case, that's where we're really focused on the innovation. And where your community, the S&T community, hopefully you can dig in and sink in. There's a lot more technical details in terms of what we need for vaccine innovation or for manufacturing. But I also encourage you to read the annual progress report, because your stuff is all over it. So, and the reason your stuff is all over our annual progress report is that it is talking about things that are working so we get closer to these goals of a 100-day mission, and ultimately so that we're better prepared for the next pandemic. But I also think it's worth reading, because you're gonna see your own stuff there, which is great, but you're also gonna see what everybody else is doing. So we're big fans of transparency in our government. We're big fans of transparency in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So in our annual progress report, the point is, tell people what we're doing. The American public pays for this. They should know that we're making progress. They should know about just it's a good news story. There's a massive number of programs that are doing really good work. So I think we have the strategy in place, the top cover, that you need to meet those crazy goals that Hillary talked about. So how, more specifically then, do we get there? And that's where we get into the 3 Ps. And I want to start with portfolio. So the world we imagine is that if you can look at all of the effort in innovation of the United States government, and if that, bear with me, come with me on this journey, imagine that as a very large single portfolio, where what we say is, okay, we need a diagnostic that does these types of things. And then we look across the work you're doing in Department of Defense and Health and Human Services, and we have the VA health system, and we have all these different components of the federal government that sort of get at different aspects of this problem. But at the end of the day, if you're the American taxpayer, our customer, and they say, well, I don't care how you get there, I just need a really accurate diagnostic test so I know what's wrong with me. They're not sympathetic to, well, it's in this department and that department, and you have to get this investment, then you have to wait a year and do that and all that other stuff. It really should be a portfolio. Now that sounds, when I say this to other groups in our federal government, they say you're crazy. When we talk to the private sector, they say, well, that'd be nice. I'm not sure we're meeting that goal yet, but we strive to, and we aspire to be that. But to achieve that idea of a portfolio approach, begin with the end in mind. Think about the end state product that you're trying to make and all of the different investments and partnerships along the way that get there. This audience kind of gets that. I think this, actually, the Department of Defense audience really gets this. But I will still endeavor that we, even in DoD, can do better at this. So here's what I mean. Imagine that you're thinking about this goal of 100-day vaccines, and you're starting over here. And imagine across the government, we're integrating a lot of the different investments. We're partnering with a company at the early stages. But what we're also doing is we're getting user feedback at the very beginning stages of that. So again, this audience does this really, really well in terms of delivering for the warfighter. If we are trying to deliver not only for the warfighter, but also for the American public, imagine that even in the early phases of thinking through vaccines and diagnostics, we're thinking about how people are going to take these products. We're thinking about the administration. We're thinking about the issues that DASD Watson brought up yesterday, the logistics, the thermostability. How do you actually get to shots in arms? But also, how do you make sure that everyone, not just some people, but everyone can have access to life-saving products that will protect them from the pandemic. So this idea of user feedback builds into everything that we should be doing as a federal government in terms of pandemic preparedness, and we're not doing that right now, but we aim to do that much better. So user feedback, interim metrics, again, this audience lives that, but imagine interim metrics for the 100-day mission that we just talked about here. in terms of 100 days and breaking that down into its component parts. OSTP and NSC are leading that process now. So we know if we are making progress too. And then lastly, the tests and evaluation that goes into that. And I'm going to make that point later on in terms of that type of independent tests and evaluation. But that type of portfolio approach, I think, is very achievable. One of the specific examples of a program that I won't spend too much time on, but I want to highlight it. And again, if you're sick of me giving homework, don't have to do homework on this. But if you have 5 more minutes, I would look up the Manufacturing USA program. So Manufacturing USA was a program started in the Obama administration, and what it aimed to do is set up 16 institutes that would work on different aspects of manufacturing and work in the pre-competitive space so that you could innovate in the manufacturing process. So there's one on robotics, and there's one on fabrics, and in my world, there's one on biopharmaceutical manufacturing, which is called the Nimble Consortium. Reason I'm bringing this up is they're doing amazing manufacturing innovation. Most everyone in this room that's working on medical product is going to need to not only manufacture their product, but we need to innovate in that space. Getting the early stage manufacturing done is way too slow. If you're going to meet the 100-day mission, unless we radically improve how we not only rapidly make the initial parts, but scale manufacturing, we're just not going to make it. The timing doesn't work. It just 6 months to a year for manufacturing doesn't work. So the opportunity to massively innovate in that space is there with this Manufacturing USA program. And a lot of these institutes are overseen by either the Department of Defense or Department of Energy. The biopharma one is overseen by NIST. There's great opportunity for you working on product development to partner with Manufacturing USA to innovate in the production of your product, hence the portfolio approach comes together. Second P is partnerships. Won't spend too much time on this because everybody says partnerships all day, every day, and we say it at this meeting. Again, similar to my point on international, the reason we say partnerships all the time is partially a reminder to ourselves in the government that we have to actually be good partners. And when we're not, we need to hear the feedback and the appropriate criticism that we're not. And so, but then what we have to do is we can't just say it, we have to live it. And so, very interested in this audience's feedback in terms of how we partner with you. My contention is we're actually a lot better at it in the pandemic preparedness and the biomedical research space and infectious diseases. I think we're a lot better than we used to be in terms of contracting and cost share partnerships, and DoD has been a leader in a lot of those areas. But let me highlight a couple interesting kind of new things I've seen in the partnership area that just to illustrate the point, but we can go a lot deeper if you're interested. The first is that we actually, typically how we fund or invest or encourage the innovation is we have grants, we have contracts. What we typically have not done is actually been able to access venture capital and motivate capital investment in a very promising biotech and say, great, that biotech's doing great work. Can we get private sector matched investment for it to have both commercial success and great biodefense success? But crazy thing is now we do. So in Health and Human Services, in BARDA, which is I always say BARDA's BARDA describes JPO, CBR, and defense as their equivalent. I always say the opposite. So the BARDA is the JPO, CBR, and defense, the Advanced Product Development for Pandemics and Biodefense on the HHS side of the house. They actually have a venture fund now. It's called BARDA Ventures. They've made a number of investments already, and they're planning to make more. So the idea is when a company needs capital, they say, okay, we'll go out to the private sector, we'll get investors from here and there and everywhere. That's great. It's not taxpayer dollars, that's great. But by BARDA Ventures also helping them raise money, we get that foot in the door to make sure that technology, as it develops, can also still be used for the pandemic purpose, which is what our national security purpose, which is what we care so deeply about. It's really cool, right? And we've never had this before, never seen this before in my career, but now it's another tool in the toolbox where we can partner. It's a different way than we usually partner, but we can partner with a biotech to achieve the aim that we want to achieve. Another very quick highlight is especially nurturing kind of early biotechs, the spin-offs from universities and stuff that we're seeing so much of these days that I absolutely love. is that we're seeing our government investment in those small businesses also tagging on with entrepreneurship programs. So DARPA, for example, has an embedded entrepreneurship program. So as they fund a small biotech, they say, we will also fund you to develop a business development plan and to coach you and teach you in entrepreneurship. And they actually bring in retired private sector executives to coach these biotechs on how they do. Well, that's a really good idea, and we should do more of that. So I'm seeing a lot of that in our government. It's a great case in point in new ways that we're partnering. So my third and final is this idea of pivot. Again, I think the Department of Defense, this audience gets it super duper well, but I preach about this on a daily basis at the White House level. And the pivot fundamental concept is the stuff that we're going to use during an emergency or during a crisis or during a pandemic is what we've been practicing on every day. And we have all the buzzwords, right? We have muscle memory, but this audience, you totally get it. It's the train as you fight. This is what the Department of Defense does. We train and get really good at scenarios that we think are going to be very likely, and they may be slightly different, but we're ready because we also train to have initiative and improvise, right? So that seems kind of obvious, but that applied to pandemics and to biodefense preparedness is actually really powerful, because what it then means is that even if we're not in a bio incident right now, even if we haven't been hit with a biological threat, or even if we're not in another pandemic, then the response that we utilize for outbreaks or for even endemic infectious diseases that are global health problems, such as malaria, that are also force health protection problems, such as malaria, the response for those, the product development for those, that muscle memory, that training is about the same training that we do otherwise. And so when we have outbreaks, and everybody watching the news, the pace of these infectious diseases outbreaks, these infectious diseases challenges continues to accelerate. We all know that, we all live that. Every time we see that, what we should be doing is, first of all, stopping it, because we got to save lives, but we should also use that as an exercise to say, how fast can we do a product development? How fast can we develop a diagnostic? How fast can we have what we need to do to succeed? And not only does that mean we're exercising the muscle memory, but we're also doing the assessment. So can we make a vaccine in 100 days? I don't know. Can the next outbreak challenge us to make a vaccine in 100 days? And at least we can figure out where the gaps are. Absolutely. So that's what I mean by that concept of pivoting. One specific example that's not in this world as much is over at the National Institute of Health. They have a diagnostics program called RADx. And I think it's been really one of the shining lights in terms of public-private partnership and independent tests and evaluation, all those things that we should be done in terms of diagnostics development. They started off as a network for COVID. They worked at lab, and then they worked at point of care, and they did a lot of work on the home COVID testing. And so now what they're doing now is they're working on Mpox, and they're working on multiplex respiratory. And there's a lot of talk about what other infectious diseases could they work on. But it's a lot of times the same technology. And interestingly enough, it's not only a testing problem, but it's really a test to treat problem too. That's the muscle memory we need to get even better at. And so again, what we can do is we can say, how well do we test for antimicrobial resistance? And then how soon can life-saving antibiotics be administered? That concept of bringing those two things together and working on a health threat like antimicrobial resistance, which is certainly relevant for force health protection and is a global crisis. But as we work on that, we also get much better at our biodefense capabilities, and we get much better responding to the next pandemic. So in conclusion, I think we have the top cover. We have the strategy. We have some really, really good goals. Please align to those goals. We are trying to match your energy, innovation, and enthusiasm. We're taking a portfolio approach. We're doing, I think, better at partnerships, but would love the feedback in Q&A and otherwise. But also then, I love this idea of pivoting, and especially if we're pivoting and solving. It's not bad if we can solve global health problems too, and it's not bad if we can really address AMR and those types of things while we get ready for the future challenge. Are we going to be able to get there? is this achievable? I don't know. I mean, the goals are super hard. And we all know the reasons why it doesn't work. We've all been those of you in the government system like me feel the frustration and the disappointment when we can't get stuff done. But conferences like these, I think this is where at least for me, I derive a lot of inspiration from this. I see all the smart people in the room. But even more importantly, and I'll end on this, is that what I love about this group assembled here is that everybody who does this, it's not about you. It's about the mission. And at the end of the day, I think, even though it's really hard to do, we are going to make our nation safer because of you. Thank you very much.